Have you ever been in a situation where someone's harsh words or unfair judgment left you feeling small, questioning your worth? Maybe it was a coworker undermining your efforts, a stranger's cruel comment online, or even someone close to you who should have known better. That sting of criticism, especially when it feels undeserved, can linger, weighing on your confidence and making it hard to move forward. But what if I told you there's a way to not just shake it off, but to reclaim your power so completely that no opinion, no matter how unjust, can ever diminish you again? This isn't about ignoring the pain or pretending it doesn't hurt. It's about something far more profound: Stoicism, an ancient philosophy designed to fortify your mind against life's toughest blows. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's greatest Stoic thinkers and a Roman emperor who faced relentless scrutiny, once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. That's the heart of what we're exploring today: how to shift your focus from what others say or think to what you alone control, your reactions, your values, your inner peace. Because here's the truth: criticism only has the power you give it. When you master the art of detachment, when you learn to see judgments for what they really are, noise, not truth, you unlock a level of freedom most people never experience. This video is your guide to doing exactly that. We'll dive into Stoic principles that have stood the test of time, tools to help you deflect negativity without resentment, to stand firm in your worth without needing validation, and to turn criticism into fuel for growth. Imagine walking through life unshaken, not because you're immune to pain, but because you've built something unbreakable within yourself. That's the journey ahead. So if you're ready to stop giving away your power and start owning it fully, unapologetically, let's begin. Criticism is like weather. It happens around us, but it doesn't have to define our internal climate. Think about the last time someone said something harsh or dismissive about you. That comment existed outside of you, separate from your worth or ability. But what made it sting? The meaning you attached to it. This is where Stoicism offers a game-changing perspective. Epictetus, the former slave who became one of Stoicism's most influential teachers, put it simply: it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. His entire philosophy revolved around one crucial distinction between what we control and what we don't. Your boss's tone, a stranger's judgment, even a friend's offhand remark, these are external events. They belong to the realm of things you can't command, but your interpretation, your emotional response, the way you choose to engage or disengage, that's entirely yours to govern. Take workplace feedback as an example. Imagine two colleagues receiving the same critical email from their manager. One spirals into self-doubt, replaying every word as proof of their inadequacy. The other pauses, asks, "Is there truth here I can use?" and lets the rest roll off like water on a windshield. The criticism didn't change. The difference was in what each person decided it meant. This is the power of the Stoic pause, that split second where you reclaim agency by asking, "Does this serve me?" Now, reflect on your own life. Can you recall a time when criticism hit harder than it should have? Maybe you lost sleep over a relative's thoughtless remark or replayed a negative online comment in your head for days. What if, in that moment, you'd remembered Epictetus's boundary, that the words themselves were beyond your control, but your peace of mind wasn't? This isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending criticism doesn't affect you. It's about recognizing that you hold the pen when it comes to writing the story of its impact. The next time criticism lands, try this. Picture it as a letter delivered to your doorstep. You can open it, read it, even study it, but you decide whether to frame it on your wall or toss it into the recycling bin. That choice is where your power lies. Stoicism teaches us that freedom begins with recognizing a simple but life-changing truth. Some things are within our power and others are not. This is the dichotomy of control, the foundation of emotional resilience. Picture a circle. Inside it are your thoughts, your choices, your efforts. Outside, everything else: the weather, traffic, other people's opinions. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who advised emperors, wrote that suffering comes from confusing what is up to us with what is not. When someone criticizes you unfairly, their words exist outside that circle. They're like rain falling on a roof. You didn't cause it, you can't stop it, but you decide whether to let it drown you or simply notice it and move on. Here's the practical magic of this idea. Grab a piece of paper and draw two columns. Label one within my control, the other not within my control. Now think of a recent criticism that bothered you. Maybe it was your partner questioning your priorities or a social media post mocking your beliefs. Write it down. Which column does it belong in? If it's about someone else's judgment, it goes in the not within my control column. But your response, whether you internalize it, learn from it, or dismiss it, that's firmly in the first column. This exercise isn't about dismissing pain, it's about reclaiming agency. Seneca faced constant political attacks during his life, yet he wrote, "A wise person is neither raised up by praise nor cast down by blame." Why? Because he understood that his worth wasn't currency for others to appraise. Try this daily. When criticism stings, pause and ask, does this reflect something I can improve, or is it just noise? If it's the former, grow from it. If it's the latter, let it pass like a cloud. The more you practice this sorting, the lighter you'll feel, not because the world changes, but because you stop carrying what was never yours to hold. Marcus Aurelius described the mind as an inner citadel, a fortress where your true self remains untouched by outside chaos. Picture standing at the window of a tall tower, watching people below shout insults up at you. Their voices reach your ears, but the walls are thick enough that their words can't shake the foundation. That's cognitive detachment, the practice of witnessing criticism without letting it cross the threshold of your peace. The Stoics didn't advocate suppressing emotions or pretending hurtful words don't exist. Instead, they taught the art of observation without absorption. Think of it like watching clouds drift across the sky. You notice their shapes, their movement, but you don't feel personally responsible for the weather. Someone's harsh opinion is just like that, a passing phenomenon, not a verdict on your worth. Journaling is one of the most powerful tools to cultivate this skill. When criticism lands, write it down verbatim, then step back as if you're analyzing a historical document. Ask yourself, is this fact or interpretation? Does it align with my values, or is it just noise? The act of putting it on paper creates psychological distance, turning a raw emotional reaction into an object you can examine with curiosity rather than dread. Seneca used this method himself, writing letters to dissect his own reactions to unfair treatment. By externalizing the criticism, you strip it of its emotional charge and see it for what it really is, an external event, not a truth. So here's a challenge for you today. Pick one piece of criticism you've recently received, maybe a snide remark from a family gathering or a dismissive comment at work, and practice observing it like a scientist studying a specimen. Hold it up to the light. Where did it come from? What assumptions does it carry? Does it hold weight, or is it just wind? The moment you realize you don't have to accept every thought or opinion that comes your way, you reclaim something priceless, the freedom to choose what defines you. One of the most powerful tools in Stoicism is the ability to shift perspective to see criticism not as a personal attack, but as either useful feedback or meaningless noise. Epictetus compared his philosophy school to a hospital for the soul, where students came not to be praised but to be treated. Imagine walking into a doctor's office and expecting compliments instead of a diagnosis. That's how the Stoics approached criticism, as a chance to identify weaknesses and grow stronger. When someone points out a flaw, they're handing you a mirror. You get to decide whether to examine your reflection or walk away. Take Cato the Younger, the Stoic statesman who was famously slandered by political rivals. While others scrambled to defend their reputations, Cato remained unmoved. When asked why he didn't respond to vicious rumors, he simply said, "If people speak ill of you and it's true, correct yourself. If it's false, laugh it off." That's the essence of perspective. Criticism becomes useful the moment you ask, "Does this help me improve?" If the answer is yes, it's feedback. If no, it's just background noise. Here's how to apply this today. The next time criticism lands, whether it's a passive-aggressive comment from a coworker or an online troll's jab, pause and run it through this filter. Ask yourself, is there a kernel of truth here that makes me better? Or is this just someone projecting their own insecurities? One fuels growth, the other deserves nothing more than a mental delete button. Think of your mind as a garden. Feedback is fertilizer. It might smell unpleasant at first, but it helps you bloom. Noise, that's just litter blowing in from the street. You wouldn't painstakingly plant trash in your flower beds, so why let baseless opinions take root in your mind? Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." When you refuse to let unjust criticism dictate your emotions, you rob it of its power. Try this experiment for 1 week. Treat every critique like a package. Before opening it, check the label. Does it come from someone who genuinely wants to see you improve? Unwrap it with curiosity. Is it anonymous or malicious? Leave it on the doorstep. Perspective isn't about ignoring pain. It's about choosing which pains are worth your attention. Because in the end, the only criticism that defines you is the criticism you decide to keep. There's an old Stoic practice called amor fati, Latin for love of fate. It's the radical idea of embracing everything life throws at you, not just enduring it, but welcoming it as necessary fuel for your growth. Friedrich Nietzsche, who admired Stoicism, later put it this way: "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not in the future, not in the past, not for all eternity." Imagine standing in a storm and instead of bracing against the wind, you open your arms and let it shape you, trusting it's carving you into something stronger. That's the mindset shift that transforms criticism from a personal attack into just another gust of wind, powerful, but incapable of breaking you unless you resist it. Think of a young tree in a relentless storm. If it stays rigid, it snaps, but if it bends, it absorbs the force and grows deeper roots in the process. Criticism works the same way. The moment you stop fighting it, the moment you say, "This too is part of my story," you take away its power to destabilize you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In other words, the criticism you dread today could be the exact thing that sharpens your resilience tomorrow. Here's how to practice this. Look back at the last piece of criticism that bothered you. Maybe it was a friend's blunt advice or a stranger's harsh review. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" try asking, "How is this happening for me?" There's almost always a hidden lesson, even if it's just teaching you to trust yourself more or revealing where you're still sensitive to others' opinions. Nietzsche didn't just tolerate hardship, He saw it as the chisel that sculpted his strength. Your turn. Find one recent criticism and mine it for a single insight. Did it show you where you need thicker skin, highlight an area where you could grow, or simply remind you that some opinions aren't worth your energy? Amor Fati isn't about pretending criticism doesn't hurt. It's about knowing that even the hurt has a purpose if you're willing to look for it. There's a quiet power in refusing to engage, a strength that often speaks louder than any rebuttal. Seneca observed, "When you argue with a fool, you become an audience for their nonsense." The Stoics understood something we often forget in our hyper-connected world. Not every criticism deserves a response. In fact, responding to baseless attacks only gives them oxygen, turning a spark into a fire. Picture someone shouting into an empty canyon. The echo eventually fades, but if you shout back, the noise just grows. That's the paradox of reactivity. The more you defend, the more you validate the critic's illusion of importance. Now, contrast this with how we typically handle criticism today, especially online. Someone leaves a cutting comment, and within minutes we're drafting a heated reply, fingers flying across the keyboard. But ask yourself, has that ever truly made you feel better, or has it just pulled you deeper into a battle no one wins? Social media rewards speed over wisdom, turning disagreements into public spectacles. The Stoics would have seen this for what it is, a trap. Every minute spent wrestling with a troll is a minute stolen from your peace, your growth, your real life. Here's a practical tool to break the cycle, the 24-hour rule. Before responding to any criticism, especially the kind that makes your pulse race, wait a full day. Leap on it, let the initial sting fade. You'll often find that what felt urgent in the moment was never worth your energy. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength." Silence isn't passive, it's a deliberate choice to conserve your focus for what truly matters. Think back to a time when you chose silence over reaction. Maybe it was biting your tongue during a family argument or refusing to engage with a coworker's petty jab. That silence wasn't weakness, it was the high ground. It takes far more discipline to walk away than to fire back. The next time criticism tempts you to react, pause and ask, will this exchange improve my life or just drain it? Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is saying nothing at all. The Stoics knew this truth centuries ago, and it's never been more relevant. In a world addicted to noise, your silence becomes your signature. The Stoics practiced something called Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. It sounds grim, but it's actually one of the most liberating tools for deflecting criticism. The idea is simple. By mentally rehearsing life's harshest blows before they happen, you strip them of their power to surprise or destabilize you. Marcus Aurelius began every morning with this exercise. He'd visualize the day ahead, the annoying people he'd encounter, the unfair accusations he might face, and rehearse his calm, measured responses. It wasn't pessimism, it was emotional vaccination. By exposing himself to discomfort in his imagination, he built immunity to it in reality. Try this today. Picture a critic, maybe your boss, a family member, or an internet stranger, voicing the exact words that usually trigger you. Hear their tone, see their expression. Now imagine yourself pausing, breathing, and responding with detached clarity. The Stoics called this the pre-rehearsal of troubles, and it works because surprise amplifies pain. When you've already walked through the worst-case scenario in your mind, the real thing feels like a rerun, not a crisis. Here's how to take it further. Role-play a tough conversation out loud. Stand in front of a mirror and articulate the criticism you fear most. Then practice replying with steady, unshaken composure. It might feel awkward at first, but that's the point. You're training your nervous system to recognize discomfort as familiar territory, not a threat. Epictetus trained his students this way, throwing hypothetical insults at them until their flinches turned into shrugs. The goal wasn't to become numb, it was to master the space between stimulus and response. Now add a layer of inspiration. Ask yourself, how would my hero handle this, whether it's a historical figure like Nelson Mandela or a fictional character like Atticus Finch? Channel their poise. Criticism shrinks when you realize you're not just responding as yourself, you're responding as the best version of yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." By expecting less than ideal behavior, he was never caught off guard. This practice isn't about assuming the worst in people. It's about refusing to let their worst define your peace. The next time you brace for feedback, whether it's a performance review or a family debate, take 5 minutes to mentally rehearse. See yourself listening, evaluating, and choosing your response with intention. When the moment arrives, you'll find something remarkable. The criticism lands, but it doesn't stick. You've already weathered it in your mind, and now you're free to move through it like a stone through water, unbroken, unchanged, and utterly in control. Virtue isn't just a moral ideal, it's armor. Epictetus, who endured slavery before becoming one of history's most revered philosophers, put it bluntly: if someone speaks badly of you and it's true, correct yourself. If it's a lie, laugh it off. His point, reputations are fragile, but integrity is unshakable. When you ground yourself in principles that no insult can erode, criticism becomes like arrows bouncing off a shield. They might clatter loudly, but they can't pierce what's solid within you. Consider Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years imprisoned under a regime that smeared him as a terrorist. Yet he refused to let their narrative define him. Instead, he clung to his values: justice, forgiveness, resilience, and emerged not just unbroken, but towering in moral authority. His enemies controlled his prison cell, but they couldn't touch his character. That's the power of virtue as armor. It doesn't guarantee you'll avoid attacks, but it ensures none of them can truly wound you. Now think about your own life. What are the values you defend at any cost? Maybe it's honesty, even when the truth is inconvenient. Maybe it's kindness, even to those who don't deserve it. Write them down. These are your non-negotiables, the pillars that'll hold you upright when storms of criticism hit. The Stoics called this living in alignment. When your actions match your deepest beliefs, no opinion can throw you off course. Here's a challenge. The next time someone attacks your character, ask yourself one question: did I violate my own code? If the answer is no, their words are just noise. If it's yes, that's not failure, it's feedback. Either way, you win, because virtue isn't about being perfect, it's about being accountable. And accountability is the one thing no critic can ever take from you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be." Be one. That's the ultimate armor. When you stop worrying about how others perceive you and start focusing on who you know yourself to be, you become impervious to the one thing most people fear: judgment. So stand firm in your values. Let them be the foundation no storm can shake. And remember, the louder the criticism, the more it reveals about the critic, not you. Sometimes the harshest criticism says more about the person delivering it than the person receiving it. Seneca observed, "We are often more frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than reality." He understood something profound, that when people lash out, they're often projecting their own unresolved fears and insecurities onto others. Picture a colleague who constantly nitpicks your presentations. On the surface, it seems like they're critiquing your work, but dig deeper, and you might discover they're terrified of being overshadowed or exposed as inadequate themselves. This is the mirror of criticism. What appears to be about you is often a reflection of their inner struggles. Take workplace blame culture as an example. In toxic environments, you'll notice certain individuals consistently deflect responsibility onto others. The coworker who loudly points fingers when projects go wrong isn't necessarily identifying real flaws in the team. They're revealing their own paralyzing fear of failure. Their outbursts are less about accountability and more about self-preservation. The Stoics would recognize this immediately. Epictetus taught his students to ask, "What part of this belongs to me?" When faced with accusations, not to absorb unwarranted blame, but to separate legitimate feedback from emotional debris. Here's how to apply this insight. The next time someone delivers criticism that feels disproportionate or oddly personal, pause and ask yourself two questions. What might this reveal about their current state of mind? And is there genuine substance here, or is this more about their narrative than my reality? This isn't about excusing poor behavior. It's about refusing to internalize what was never yours to carry. Imagine holding up a literal mirror when harsh words come your way. Some criticisms will stick because they're true and useful. Others will bounce back to their source because they were never really about you in the first place. Consider the last time someone criticized you in a way that felt loaded with emotion, maybe a family member's barb about your life choices, or a stranger's unsolicited opinion on social media. Now flip the script. What if their intensity says nothing about your worth and everything about their unmet needs? A parent's harsh judgment might reflect their own unrealized dreams. A troll's venom often exposes their hunger for attention or control. This perspective doesn't make the sting disappear overnight, but it does give you something far more valuable: the ability to process criticism without personalizing it. Marcus Aurelius kept a journal reminder that still resonates. When another blames you or hates you, remember that they're doing what seems right to them. That's the ultimate reframe. People criticize through the lens of their own experiences, biases, and limitations. Their words are data points about their worldview, not verdicts on yours. So the next time unfair criticism lands, try this exercise. Write down what was said, then next to it, brainstorm 3 possible reasons this person might have said it, reasons that have nothing to do with you. You'll often find the weight lifts when you realize you were never the main character in their story to begin with, the most liberating truth Stoicism offers. You get to decide which reflections are worth studying and which are just distorted glass. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, had a reputation for disarming insults with sharp wit rather than anger. When a heckler once interrupted his lecture with rude comments, Zeno didn't lash out or retreat. He simply smiled and said, "I'm grateful you've taken time from your busy schedule of ignorance to attend my class." The crowd laughed, the tension dissolved, and the critic slunk away, outmaneuvered by humor's lightness. This wasn't about mockery or cruelty. It was a masterclass in using playfulness as armor. The Stoics understood something we often forget. Laughter can be a form of sovereignty. When you refuse to let criticism land with gravity, you expose its absurdity. Compare that to today's cancel culture, where every slight becomes a battleground and responses often escalate rather than resolve. Think of social media pile-ons, outrage feeding on outrage until the original point is lost. The Stoic alternative: treat unjust criticism like a bad joke, not by dismissing real harm, but by refusing to dignify pettiness with solemnity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to not be like your enemy." Sometimes that means answering venom not with more venom, but with a raised eyebrow and a well-timed quip. Here's how to apply this today. Picture someone lobbing a passive-aggressive remark your way, maybe a relative sniping about your life choices or a coworker undermining you in a meeting. Instead of stiffening or firing back, try Zeno's approach. Thanks for the feedback, I'll file it under unsolicited life advice. Humor works because it flips the script. It takes the critic's attempt to diminish you and reveals it as theater. The key is tone playful, not punitive. You're not attacking back, you're letting their words bounce off you like a rubber ball. This isn't about becoming a stand-up comedian. It's about recognizing that some criticisms deserve nothing more than a mental eye roll. Next time you face an unfair jab, ask yourself, how could I respond in a way that's both true to my values and utterly unbothered? Maybe it's a deadpan, wow, tell me how you really feel, or an exaggerated, ah yes, another flawless take from someone who's never met me. The goal isn't to win the exchange, it's to remind yourself and them that their opinion doesn't dictate your worth. Epictetus said, if someone tried to hand you a cup of poison, you wouldn't drink it just because they offered it. Unjust criticism is that poison. Humor, that's the antidote, a way to pour it out without spilling a drop on yourself. So the next time life hands you lemons of criticism, don't just make lemonade. Toss one back and say, nice throw, too bad I'm wearing armor. Think about the most scathing criticism you've ever received, the kind that kept you up at night, replaying the words like a broken record. Now fast forward 5 years, does it still sting? Does it even matter? Marcus Aurelius wrote, in the vast abyss of eternity, the span of our lives is but a pinpoint. That's the power of perspective. The insults that feel earth-shattering today will likely be forgotten dust in the grand sweep of time. History is littered with scandals that once dominated headlines, political smear campaigns, celebrity feuds, social media firestorms that now barely register as footnotes. The outrage that felt permanent in the moment, it evaporated, leaving no trace behind. Consider the Roman Emperor Caligula, whose reign was marked by cruelty and excess. His contemporaries wrote scathing accounts of his behavior, convinced his name would live in infamy forever. Yet 2,000 years later, most people couldn't pick him out of a lineup of ancient rulers. The same will be true of today's viral controversies. That coworker who undermined you in last week's meeting, the online troll who crafted the perfect insult. Their words are like chalk on a sidewalk, intense in the moment, but washed away by the next rain. This isn't about dismissing your pain, it's about contextualizing it. Picture yourself 5 years from now, looking back at this moment. What will stand out? Probably not the criticism, but how you grew through it. The Stoics called this the view from above, a zooming out until petty grievances shrink into insignificance. Imagine floating high enough to see your entire life at once. From that altitude, most criticism doesn't just look small, it becomes invisible. What remains are the choices you made in response. Did you let it harden you or soften you? Did you absorb it or transcend it? Here's a practical exercise. Grab a notebook and write down 3 criticisms that felt devastating in the past but now seem trivial. Next to each, note what you learned, if anything, and how much energy they're still worth. You'll likely find a pattern. The louder the criticism, the quicker it faded. The Roman philosopher Seneca was exiled for a scandal that historians still don't fully understand. His response: what need is there to weep over parts of life? The whole of it calls for tears. He recognized that fixating on individual slights misses the bigger truth. Life's too short to give every insult a front row seat in your mind. So the next time criticism lands, pause and ask yourself, will this matter in 5 years, 5 months, even 5 weeks? If the answer's no, and it usually is, treat it like a passing cloud. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because you refuse to let temporary pain create permanent scars. The vast abyss of eternity doesn't erase your struggles. It just reminds you that most of them are smaller than they feel. And that realization, that's the ultimate liberation. Imagine standing before a mirror where the only reflection that matters is your own, not the warped versions others might hold up to you. That's the essence of the Stoic inner judge, the part of you that weighs actions against your own standards, not the fickle court of public opinion. Epictetus described this as cultivating your inner philosopher king, a ruler who governs with wisdom, undistracted by the cheers or jeers of the crowd. He didn't say this to flatter egos. He said it because truthfully, no external verdict, whether a standing ovation or a chorus of boos, can ever measure your worth if you haven't first defined it for yourself. Social media has twisted this beyond recognition. We've been trained to equate value with likes, to confuse visibility with virtue. But think about it. When you post something online, the same action might earn praise from one group and scorn from another. Does that mean your post's worth changes depending on who's scrolling? Of course not. Yet we let these reactions dictate our confidence anyway. The Stoics would have seen this for the trap it is. Your inner philosopher king doesn't rule by referendum. Its power comes from something far more stable, your own unwavering criteria for what matters. Here's how to reclaim that sovereignty. Once a week, set aside 10 minutes for what the Stoics called attentive self-review. Not to beat yourself up for shortcomings, but to ask two questions. Did I act in alignment with my values? And whose approval am I genuinely seeking? The first keeps you honest with yourself. The second reveals whether you're living for an audience or for principles. Marcus Aurelius did this daily in his journals, writing not for publication, but for self-examination. His private reflections became meditations, but their power wasn't in their eloquence, it was in their refusal to outsource judgment. Consider two artists, one who paints solely for gallery acclaim, adjusting their style with every critic's whim, and another who creates for the sheer necessity of expression. The first might gain temporary fame, but the second, they'll always know who they are. That's the difference between external validation and inner resolve. When Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid," he wasn't endorsing mediocrity. He was exposing the paradox of chasing approval. The moment you stop needing it, you become free to excel on your own terms. So ask yourself tonight, whose applause actually fuels you, the faceless crowds or the quiet nod of your own conscience? Because here's the secret no algorithm will tell you. The opinions that matter most are the ones you choose to let matter. The rest, just noise passing through the courtyard of your mind, loud one moment, gone the next. Your inner philosopher king doesn't need to silence the noise. It just knows better than to mistake it for truth. Socrates faced his execution with the same calm he'd shown in the Athenian agora, sipping hemlock while his accusers shouted lies about corrupting the youth. Centuries later, his name is synonymous with wisdom while his critics are footnotes at best. That's the paradox of slander. It may bruise in the moment, but history tends to remember the character of the target, not the noise of the crowd. The Stoics revered Socrates not because he was immune to pain, but because he refused to let falsehoods alter his truth. When the jury condemned him, he didn't beg for mercy or rage against injustice. He simply said, "The hour of departure has arrived, and we go our ways, I to die, and you to live, which is better, only the gods know." His quiet dignity turned his trial from a defeat into a masterclass in resilience. Then there's Cato the Younger, the Stoic senator who stood alone against Julius Caesar's corruption, enduring endless slander from political enemies. They called him rigid, humorless, even fanatical, but Cato's response was to double down on integrity. When Caesar's allies spread rumors to discredit him, Cato didn't issue rebuttals. He showed up to the Senate in ragged clothes, proving he cared nothing for the opinions of those who'd abandoned principle for power. His strategy: let actions drown out words. Modern influencers could learn from this. Think of a YouTuber falsely accused of scandal. The ones who thrive aren't those who engage in endless drama, but those who keep creating, letting their work speak louder than the gossip. Now consider Zeno of Citium, founder of Stoicism, who lost everything in a shipwreck before reinventing himself as a philosopher. When rivals mocked his humble lecture space, a painted porch, or stoa in Greek, he didn't defend his circumstances. He leaned into them, naming his entire philosophy after that porch. The insult became his brand. Today's equivalent: the entrepreneur who turns a viral roast into a marketing opportunity, or the artist who incorporates negative comments into their next piece. Resilience isn't about avoiding attacks, it's about rewriting their meaning. Who's your personal Cato or Socrates? Maybe it's a historical figure like Mandela, who transformed prison smears into moral authority. Maybe it's a modern creator like Taylor Swift, who spun public feuds into chart-topping art. Or perhaps it's someone less famous, a teacher who stayed kind despite parent complaints, or a co-worker who outlasted office politics with quiet excellence. Write their name down, then ask, what would they do in your shoes? Not with grand gestures, but with daily choices: ignoring a troll's comment, laughing off a snide remark, or channeling unfair criticism into fuel for growth. What these role models share isn't thick skin, it's something far more powerful: the understanding that reputation is what others think of you, but character is what you know to be true. The criticisms that once haunted them are now just echoes in history's hallway, drowned out by the enduring impact of how they lived. Your story will be no different. The noise fades, the truth remains. Epictetus once said, "It's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things." That single idea holds the key to deflecting criticism like arrows off armor. It all comes down to what psychologists now call the discipline of assent. Think of your mind as a courtroom where every critical comment stands trial before being admitted as evidence. The moment someone says, "You're terrible at this," that statement is just an impression, a claim, not a verdict. Your power lies in the pause between hearing it and deciding whether to gavel it into truth. Picture this: you're in a meeting when a colleague dismisses your idea with, "That'll never work." In that split second, most people do one of two things: either swallow the criticism whole, letting it sour their confidence, or lash out defensively. But there's a third path, the Stoic Pause. Imagine mentally raising your hand and saying, "Objection. What's the proof?" Suddenly, you're no longer a passive recipient of judgment. You're an active judge weighing facts. This is what Epictetus meant when he taught that impressions, those initial thoughts or criticisms that enter our minds, are just visitors. They only move in if we invite them. Here's how to put this into practice today. The next time criticism lands, try the breath counting technique. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 6. That 12-second window creates just enough space to ask 2 crucial questions. Is this objectively true? And does believing this serve me? Imagine your mind as a bouncer at a club, checking ID before letting thoughts inside. Some criticisms get a VIP pass because they're constructive and grounded in reality. Others, they're just troublemakers in fancy clothes, and you have every right to turn them away at the door. Consider how differently criticism lands when you apply this filter. A boss saying, "Your report had 3 factual errors, here they are," provides verifiable data. That's evidence worth examining, but "You're careless and unprofessional." That's an interpretation, not a fact. One belongs in your mental courtroom's evidence file, the other gets dismissed for lack of proof. Now take this a step further with what I call the energy audit. Every thought you accept becomes a tenant in your mind, paying rent with your focus and emotional bandwidth. So ask yourself, is this criticism worth the space it's demanding? A mentor's tough feedback might be worth renovating your entire mental floor plan. A stranger's drive-by insult, that's not even worth a parking spot. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, writing in his journal, "Today I'll meet interference, ingratitude, insolence. But I can't be angry or feel hindered because how I respond is entirely up to me." Try this exercise tonight. Recall one recent criticism that bothered you and put it on trial. What verifiable facts support it? What alternative explanations exist? Could the critic be projecting their own insecurities? You'll often find that what felt like a damning indictment crumbles under cross-examination. That's the magic of the discipline of assent. It turns criticism from a sentence you serve into a case you dismiss. And with every dismissal, you reinforce something far more powerful than any insult: your sovereignty over your own mind. Marcus Aurelius kept a private journal where he thanked people by name, not for their kindness, but for their cruelty. When you wake up in the morning, he wrote, "Tell yourself, the people I will meet today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant. They are like this because they cannot tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, so none of them can hurt me." This wasn't resentment disguised as gratitude. It was a radical reframe, viewing critics not as adversaries, but as involuntary mentors revealing where his growth lay. Take the modern example of a tech CEO who treats criticism like bug reports in software development. Every complaint, whether from a disgruntled customer or a skeptical investor, gets logged not as a personal attack, but as data pointing to a potential improvement. One founder famously printed out one-star reviews and taped them to his office wall under the heading, "Free Consulting." The angrier the critique, the more valuable the insight. This mindset shift transforms detractors into unpaid focus groups, highlighting blind spots you might never have noticed on your own. Here's the challenge: the next time someone criticizes you, ask yourself, even if 99% of this is noise, what's the 1% that might be a signal? Maybe your coworker's harsh tone was unjustified, but buried in their rant was a valid point about your presentation's pacing. Perhaps a negative comment on your creative work stung, but it hinted at a genuine inconsistency in your style. The Stoics called this separating the wheat from the chaff, harvesting the nutritional value while letting the husks blow away. Consider how athletes use game footage. They don't watch highlights of their best plays to improve. They obsess over their mistakes. Critics are like that footage, unflattering angles showing exactly where you need to adjust your form. Marcus Aurelius thanked his critics because they forced him to sharpen his virtues under pressure. Your critics, intentional or not, are doing the same. They're stress testing your character, revealing leaks in your confidence, and, if you're willing to look, offering blueprints for upgrades you'd never design alone. So try this exercise today. Pick one recent criticism that irritated you and dissect it like a scientist, not to relive the discomfort, but to mine it for one actionable nugget. Maybe the person who called you stubborn accidentally highlighted your commitment to principles. Maybe the comment about your overthinking revealed a strength in attention to detail that just needs calibration. The goal isn't to agree with every critique, it's to recognize that even the worst deliveries can contain accidental gifts. After all, diamonds are just coal that handled pressure differently. Your critics, they're the pressure that polishes. Seneca called anger brief madness, a fire that burns brightest just before it consumes the one holding the match. That flash of heat when criticism lands, the urge to snap back or defend, That's not weakness, it's human wiring. But here's where Stoicism hands you the extinguisher, the pause. Not the passive kind where you stew in resentment, but the deliberate space between trigger and action where wisdom lives. Picture a traffic light. Red means stop. Don't let the first wave of emotion hijack your tongue or keyboard. Yellow is think, ask, what's really happening here? Is this worth my energy? Green, now you act, but from choice, not compulsion. Consider how seasoned diplomats handle crises. When tensions flare, they don't improvise. They have protocols, pre-written scripts, timed silences, even designated cooling off periods before responses are drafted. Why? Because high stakes demand measured moves. Your life may not involve international treaties, but every interaction is its own negotiation. The co-worker who undermines you in a meeting, the relative who weaponizes backhanded compliments, these are your diplomatic crises. The Stoic Pause is your protocol. A United Nations mediator once shared her secret. She keeps a glass of water on the table during heated talks, not just to stay hydrated, but to create natural pauses. When emotions run high, she takes a slow sip. Those 10 seconds of silence often diffuse what hours of arguing couldn't. You don't need a water glass to replicate this. Try the breath counting technique. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. This 20-second reset, shorter than most TikTok videos, gives your rational brain time to overtake your emotional one. Now bring this home. Think of the last time criticism sent you into reactive mode. Maybe you fired off a defensive text or replayed the insult in your head like a song you can't mute. What if instead you'd instituted your own Stoic pause, not to dismiss the hurt but to decide how, or if it deserves your response? Seneca wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." Not avoidance, but the kind of delay that turns reactions into replies and impulses into intentions. So here's your challenge today. Identify one interaction where inserting a pause could change everything. Is it the group chat that always triggers you? The family member who knows exactly which buttons to push? Visualize your personal traffic light. Red, stop the spiral before it starts. Yellow, ask, what part of this belongs to me? Green, choose a response that aligns with who you are, not just how you feel. Because mastery over criticism isn't about never feeling stung. It's about never letting the sting dictate your next move. Words carry hidden gravity, the power to crush or clarify depending on how we hold them. Think about the difference between hearing, "You messed up again," and "The quarterly report contained 3 errors." The first feels like a personal indictment, the second is just data. This is the Stoic art of objective description, stripping language of emotional charge to reveal the bare facts underneath. Epictetus trained his students to do this by imagining how a dispassionate observer would recount events. Not, "My coworker attacked me in the meeting," but "My coworker raised their voice while listing concerns about the project timeline." One version pulls you into a drama, the other leaves room for solutions. Consider how journalists are taught to separate facts from interpretation. A tabloid headline screams, "Celebrity melts down on stage." While the Associated Press writes, "Singer paused performance to address technical difficulties." Both describe the same event, but one paints a narrative, the other preserves neutrality. This isn't about denying emotions, it's about recognizing that the words we choose to frame experiences either amplify or diffuse their impact. When someone says, "You're incompetent," that's an interpretation. The client email contained 2 typos is an observable fact. One pins a label, the other points to a fixable detail. Try this exercise next time criticism stings. Mentally reform at the comment as a robot might report it. If a friend snaps, "You never listen," the robotic version might say, during today's conversation, you interrupted me twice and glanced at your phone 4 times. Suddenly, what felt like a character flaw becomes a set of adjustable behaviors. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, writing in his journal, not "my advisor betrayed me," but "my advisor acted in accordance with his nature." By removing judgmental language, he created space between events and his reactions to them. Language alchemy works both ways. Picture 2 employees receiving the same critical feedback from their manager. One hears, "Your presentation was disorganized and confusing," and spirals into self-doubt. The other translates it internally as, "The audience asked 5 clarification questions during the Q&A, suggesting the flow could be tightened." Both received identical input, but the second version transforms criticism into a puzzle to solve rather than a wound to nurse. Now, apply this to your own life. Recall a recent criticism that felt personal. Maybe someone said you were lazy or thoughtless. Rewrite that comment as if you were a scientist documenting an experiment. Lazy becomes "missed 2 deadlines this month." Thoughtless turns into "forgot to include the updated figures in the team email." The content hasn't changed, but the emotional weight has. You're no longer defending your identity, you're reviewing metrics. This linguistic shift mirrors how surgeons discuss operations. They don't say, "I butchered the procedure." They note, "The incision was 2 centimeters off target." That precision keeps improvement possible and self-worth intact. Your critics may never learn this skill, but you can. When harsh words come, imagine holding them up to a linguistic light filter. Let the heat pass through while you examine what's left, the useful residue of truth, if any exists, freed from the distortion of delivery. Because in the end, criticism is just information. Whether it poisons or empowers you depends entirely on how you choose to translate it. Epictetus described our lives as a series of concentric circles, like ripples radiating from a stone dropped in water. At the center, the innermost circle, things we control completely, our thoughts, choices, values. The next ring out, partial control, our efforts, actions, but not their outcomes. Finally, the vast outer rings, everything else, other people's opinions, luck, circumstances. Here's why this matters. Most suffering comes from confusing the outer circles for the inner ones. When a stranger's critique keeps you up at night, or a relative's disapproval alters your decisions, you've handed them keys to a kingdom they don't belong in. Picture your social world mapped like this. Draw 3 circles on paper. Label the center, essential voices, those who have earned the right to critique because they know your values, share your goals, and speak with care. This circle stays small. A mentor who challenges you with respect, a partner who wants your growth, a friend who tells hard truths with love, the middle ring. Occasional advisors, colleagues with expertise, acquaintances with useful perspectives. Their input has value but requires filtering, the outermost ring. The noise, strangers on the internet, petty co-workers, anyone who critiques without context or kindness. Their words belong here, outside your gates. Now the pruning. Grab that paper and cross out one name in the outer circle, someone whose criticism consistently drains more energy than it provides. Maybe it's the Instagram follower who leaves nitpicky comments, or the cousin who frames every family gathering as a referendum on your life choices. This isn't about holding grudges, it's about recognizing that attention is currency. Every minute spent wrestling with outer circle critics is a withdrawal from your inner circle peace. History's most resilient figures mastered this triage. Eleanor Roosevelt famously said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." She didn't mean criticism wouldn't sting, she meant you decide whose stings get antiseptic and whose you let heal on their own. Think of a gardener tending roses. She doesn't uproot every thorn, some protect the blooms, but she knows which weeds choke roots and which to pull immediately. Try this tonight. Review last month's interactions. Note whose critiques fueled growth versus who's left you spinning. That colleague who dissected your proposal with granular feedback. Keep them close. The online commentator who spewed vitriol on your post. Mentally move them to the outer ring. Epictetus' model isn't about building walls, it's about installing gates. You're not shutting the world out, you're choosing who gets a seat at the table where your self-worth is served, because in the end, not all criticism weighs the same. Some is sandbags holding you down, others are compasses pointing you forward. The wisdom lies in knowing the difference. Marcus Aurelius didn't just face criticism, he dissected it, often by hand, in the pages of his private journal. Those writings, now known as meditations, weren't meant for publication. They were his mental gym, where he trained his mind to separate useful feedback from emotional noise. You can do the same. Grab a notebook and try this first prompt. What's the worst-case truth here? When criticism stings, write it down verbatim, then ask yourself, if the harshest interpretation were true, could I survive it? Maybe your boss said your presentation lacked depth. The worst-case truth, you need to research more thoroughly. That's not an indictment, it's a fixable gap. This exercise forces you to confront the fear behind the sting, and you'll often find the reality is far lighter than the weight you've been carrying. Next, borrow Marcus's habit of steel-manning criticism. Instead of dismissing unfair comments, strengthen them in writing. Take the critique you disagree with and craft the most compelling version of it you can imagine. For example, if someone calls you disorganized, write, what if they're seeing something I'm missing? Could my systems seem chaotic to others even if they make sense to me? This isn't about self-flagellation, it's about mining even biased feedback for flecks of gold. The Stoics called this amor fati, loving your fate, including the lessons hidden in unfair critiques. Now try a burn letter ritual. Write raw, unfiltered responses to your critics, every sarcastic comeback, every wounded rebuttal. Then safely burn the paper or delete the file. This isn't escapism, it's emotional alchemy. Fire has long symbolized transformation, and there's neuroscience behind why this works. Physically externalizing emotions through writing, and then ritually releasing them through burning, tricks your brain into processing the event as complete. Seneca did this metaphorically, writing scathing letters he never sent, then concluding, I have punished myself enough by thinking these thoughts. Finally, emulate Marcus's view from above exercise. Journal about the criticism as if you're observing it from space centuries later. Will this matter in 5 years? How would my future self describe this moment? Zoom out until the comment shrinks to its true size, a speck in your timeline. The Roman emperor often reminded himself that even the loudest insults fade into the abyss of time. Your journal is the telescope that brings that perspective into focus. These prompts aren't about silencing your emotions, they're about giving them a structured outlet, one that transforms criticism from a wound into a workshop. Because the page doesn't judge, it just waits patiently for you to separate what's worth keeping from what's meant to be left behind. Stoic resilience doesn't mean building walls so high that no one's pain can reach you. It's about fortifying your core while keeping the gates of compassion unlocked. The ancient philosopher Hierocles described our moral universe as a series of concentric circles, like rings around a tree. At the center, yourself, next family, then friends, community, and finally, all humanity. His radical idea, that wisdom lies in drawing these circles closer together, treating strangers as neighbors, neighbors as friends, and even critics as flawed humans worthy of understanding. This isn't about excusing cruelty. It's about recognizing that hurt people often hurt people, and their words say more about their inner weather than your worth. Picture someone who's lashed out at you, maybe a coworker who mocked your idea in a meeting or an internet stranger who left a scathing comment. Now imagine them as a child. What might have happened to harden them? Were they shamed for being wrong, taught that tearing others down was the only way to feel tall? This exercise isn't about absolving their behavior. It's about draining its power to poison your peace. Marcus Aurelius, who faced constant betrayal as emperor, wrote, "When people injure you, ask yourself what good or harm they thought would come of it." Once you understand, you'll feel sympathy rather than outrage. That shift from "how dare they" to "what wound might this be coming from" changes everything. Try this forgiveness meditation the next time criticism stings. Close your eyes and visualize the critic standing before you. Instead of rehearsing your rebuttal, silently wish them three things. May you be free from the pain driving this. May you find peace. May we both grow from this exchange. It feels counterintuitive, but there's science behind it. Studies show compassion meditations reduce stress hormones faster than venting anger. The Stoics knew this intuitively. When Epictetus was mocked for his limp, a relic of his enslavement, he didn't retaliate. He calmly replied, "If I could perfect your character, I'd start with your tongue." His response held them accountable while leaving room for their humanity. Now consider the critic who seems to relish your mistakes. What if their need to diminish you mirrors their own fear of being small? Think of a garden hose with a kink. The water spurts out violently, but the pressure isn't the hose's fault. It's the blockage. People are often the same. The coworker who nitpicks your work might be drowning in insecurity about their own. The relative who scoffs at your life choices could be grieving roads they never took. Again, this isn't about tolerating abuse. It's about refusing to let their unresolved pain become yours. Seneca, who endured exile and false accusations, wrote, "To be wronged is nothing unless you continue to remember it." Compassion is the art of selective forgetting, not of the lesson, but of the venom. When you encounter criticism today, pause and ask, what might this person's words reveal about their hidden struggles? Then, like Hierocles drawing his circles inward, mentally place them not as adversaries across a battlefield, but as fellow travelers on a rocky path. Their stones may still land at your feet, but you'll recognize them for what they are, not weapons aimed at you, but the weight they're trying to unload from their own pockets. And that realization, that's the alchemy that turns leaden words into golden perspective. Seneca warned his students about the dangers of crowds, not just physical mobs, but the invisible pull of collective opinion. Today, our crowds don't gather in marketplaces, they flood our screens. Imagine Seneca scrolling through social media, the outrage cycles, the hot takes, the performative anger. His advice would be simple but radical. What if you treated your digital space like a Stoic treats their mind? A sacred inner citadel, accessible only to those who have earned entry. The modern version of crowd avoidance isn't about isolation, it's about curation. Every time you open an app, you're stepping into a digital agora. The question is, who's shouting in your ear, and are they worth listening to? Start with a feed audit, your version of Stoic spring cleaning. Scroll through your following list and ask, does this account make me wiser or just angrier? That political pundit who turns every issue into a moral crusade, the influencer who thrives on drama, the comment sections that leave you drained, these are today's toxic crowds. Prune them mercilessly, replace them with voices that challenge you constructively, philosophers, scientists, creators who focus on solutions over scandals. Think of it like editing a library. You wouldn't keep books on your shelf that scream at you. Why tolerate digital equivalents? Now impose temporal boundaries. The Stoics practiced premeditatio malorum, anticipating distractions to guard their focus. Apply this digitally by scheduling check-ins like meetings with yourself. Set a timer for 15 minutes to scan updates, then close the app regardless of unfinished threads. The world will keep spinning, Seneca wrote. All the noise you hear is just dogs barking at shadows. Social media algorithms are those shadows, endless, insubstantial, designed to keep you chasing. Scheduled check-ins turn the endless scroll into a purposeful tool rather than a compulsion. Here's the litmus test for digital stoicism. When you close an app, do you feel enriched or eroded? That visceral reaction is your inner sage cutting through the noise. Try a week-long challenge. For every minute spent consuming outrage, spend 2 creating something meaningful, a journal entry, a sketch, a conversation with someone face-to-face. The goal isn't to disconnect from the world, but to reconnect with your agency within it. Finally, ask yourself, what digital boundaries would my future self thank me for? Maybe it's turning off notifications after sunset, muting keywords that trigger unproductive spirals, or designating one day a week as a low-tech Sabbath. Zeno of Citium founded Stoicism on a porch, not in a palace, because he knew environment shapes philosophy. Your online space is your modern porch. What do you want it to nurture? Every boundary you set isn't a wall against the world. It's the foundation for a mind that can engage with it on your terms, because the ultimate Stoic question isn't, what can I endure? But what's worth enduring? Your attention is the answer. Shame shrinks lives. It's the voice that whispers, what will they think? Before you speak your mind, wear what you love or chase an unconventional dream. But here's the paradox Epictetus uncovered 2,000 years ago. He who fears judgment fears not the crowd, but his own fear of it. In other words, shame isn't about others. It's about the power we hand them by overestimating their gaze. Think of the last time you held back because someone might disapprove. Now ask yourself, did those imagined critics actually care as much as you assumed? Or were you imprisoned by shadows on the wall of your own mind? Exposure therapy offers a clue to breaking free. Psychologists treat phobias by introducing small doses of the feared stimulus. Someone afraid of heights might first stand on a low-step stool, then a chair, gradually working up to a balcony. Apply this to shame. Start with tiny, controlled doses of visibility. Wear that bold shirt on a quick grocery run. Share an unconventional opinion in a low-stakes chat. Each time you survive, and you prove to your nervous system that judgment isn't fatal. The Stoics practiced this through voluntary discomfort. Seneca slept on hard floors, Cato wore outdated robes in public. Their goal wasn't martyrdom, but immunization against the fear of standing out. Now, the pivotal question, what would you do if no one was watching? Not just big dreams, but daily choices: dancing in your kitchen, singing off-key in the car, pursuing a hobby with no marketable value. That's your compass pointing to authentic living. Consider the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection. A cracked teacup isn't discarded, its flaws tell a story, your so-called embarrassments. They're just proof you're human in a world obsessed with curated perfection. History's most original thinkers were often called fools before they were called visionaries. Van Gogh sold one painting in his lifetime. Emily Dickinson's poetry was discovered posthumously. Their shameful obsessions became their legacies. The critic's voice is always loudest in the moment, but time has a way of turning yesterday's ridicule into today's reverence. Try this experiment today. Do one thing solely for the joy of it, with zero concern for optics. Post that photo without over-editing. Voice that idea without rehearsing its defense. Like a child building a sandcastle knowing the tide will come, embrace the temporary nature of all opinions, including your own, because the antidote to shame isn't thicker skin. It's the realization that most people are too busy writing their own inner monologues to star in yours. Ancient statues of Stoic philosophers tell a silent story, chin slightly lifted, shoulders relaxed yet grounded, gaze steady but not strained. These weren't just artistic choices, they were visual manifestos of inner sovereignty. The way you hold your body isn't just a reflection of your mindset, it's a tool to shape it. Modern science confirms what the Stoics intuited. Posture isn't merely how you present yourself to the world, it's how you communicate with your own nervous system. Slump your shoulders and your brain reads defeat. Stand like Marcus Aurelius' marble likeness, rooted yet open, and you signal resilience before a word leaves your lips. Try this now. Plant your feet shoulder-width apart. Roll your shoulders back as if gently pressing them against an imaginary wall, and let your hands rest comfortably at your sides. This isn't just standing tall, it's the physical embodiment of Epictetus' teaching. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Your body is the first audience for that declaration. Research from Harvard and Berkeley reveals that holding a power pose for just 2 minutes increases testosterone, the confidence hormone, by 20%, while reducing cortisol, the stress hormone, by 15%. The Stoics didn't have fMRI machines, but they understood the feedback loop between form and fortitude. When Seneca advised, "Let your countenance be cheerful," he wasn't advocating fakery, he was prescribing physiological alchemy. Now apply this to moments that test your resolve. Before walking into a high-stakes meeting or confronting a difficult conversation, steal 60 seconds in a restroom stall or elevator. Adopt what psychologists call the victory stance, arms raised slightly outward, chest open, head level. Breathe as if filling your entire ribcage. This isn't vanity, it's rehearsal. You're not just preparing to face others, you're reminding your limbs and lungs that they belong to someone who chooses their responses rather than being hijacked by reactions. The Roman general Scipio Africanus was known to pause before battle, not in hesitation, but to settle into what his troops called his invincible posture, a silent proclamation that no chaos could disrupt his command. But Stoic posture isn't about dominance, it's about dignity. Notice how ancient philosopher statues often have one hand slightly extended, a gesture of engagement, not aggression. This mirrors the Stoic balance between strength and receptivity. Your body language can defy unjust criticism without mirroring its hostility. When someone attacks your character, crossing your arms or leaning forward turns the exchange into a duel. Keeping your posture composed, grounded, but not rigid transforms it into a tribunal where you're the judge of what deserves response. So tonight, stand before a mirror and ask, if my body were the only thing someone could see, what would it say about my sovereignty? Then adjust, not to impress observers, but to remind yourself, you occupy space by right, not permission. The Stoics knew that true power begins in the bones, the quiet certainty that you're built to withstand pressure without breaking form. Whether facing a critic or a crisis, your posture is the first sentence in your unspoken manifesto. Make it declarative. Dawn was sacred to the Stoics, not just as a time of day, but as a blank slate for intentional living. Marcus Aurelius began each morning with a ritual so deliberate, we still study it 2,000 years later. He'd rise before the sun, light an oil lamp, and write in his journal not about dreams or plans, but about the character he intended to embody. When you wake up in the morning, he reminded himself, tell yourself, the people I meet today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant. I have seen the nature of good and evil. None of their noise can harm me. This wasn't negative thinking, it was cognitive armor forged before the day's battles began. Your morning routine isn't just about productivity, it's about preparing your mind to process criticism like a philosopher, not a pawn. Start with 5 minutes of Premeditatio Malorum, the Stoic practice of premeditating obstacles. Close your eyes and visualize 3 potential criticisms you might face today. A snide remark from a coworker, a disapproving look from a relative, an unfair online comment. Now rehearse your calm response. Picture yourself pausing, breathing, and choosing detachment over reaction. The Roman general Scipio Africanus did this daily, visualizing battlefield insults from enemies so their real words would roll off like rain. Modern psychology confirms this works. Mental simulation activates the same neural pathways as real experience, building emotional calluses before the friction even occurs. Next, anchor yourself with a passage from Stoic Texts. Keep a highlighted copy of Epictetus in Curating or Seneca's Letters by your bedside. Read just one paragraph, not to memorize but to marinate in. For example, if someone tells you that so and so speaks ill of you, don't defend yourself against the accusations, but reply, yes, and he doesn't know the half of it, or he'd have mentioned these other faults too. This isn't self-deprecation, it's inoculation against the craving for universal approval. The Roman statesman Cato the Younger read philosophy each morning while his rivals plotted. By the time they launched their verbal arrows, he'd already armored his mind with wisdom. As night falls, adopt the Stoic practice of evening scrutiny. Take 10 minutes to review the day's criticisms like a scientist analyzing data. Divide a notebook into 3 columns: criticism, source, kernel of truth. Record each barb or slight, then categorize its origin. Was it from someone whose judgment you respect, or a habitual complainer? Finally, and this is crucial, identify if there's even 1% worth keeping. Maybe the coworker who snapped about your sloppy report had a point about formatting, even if their delivery was toxic. The Stoics called this separating the wheat from the chaff. Burn or shred the page afterward as a physical release. Seneca did this with his drafts, watching smoke carry away what no longer served him. Cap the ritual with a gratitude reframe. For every criticism received, identify a corresponding strength it inadvertently highlights. My boss said I'm stubborn becomes I have conviction. My friend called me overly analytical transforms into I think deeply. This mirrors Marcus Aurelius' habit of thanking his critics in his journal not for their cruelty, but for the mirror they held up to his growth edges. Your nightly review isn't about reliving pain, it's about reclaiming narrative control. The brilliance of this routine lies in its cyclical nature. Morning preparation steels you for battle. Evening reflection turns skirmishes into wisdom. You're not avoiding criticism, you're composting it into fertilizer for resilience. Just as Roman soldiers polished their shields each night to repel tomorrow's arrows, your daily Stoic practice keeps your mental armor gleaming. The goal isn't to become impervious to hurt, but to ensure no wound ever goes to waste. Abraham Lincoln's political obituary was written long before he became the face on the $5 bill. In 1854, after a series of public failures, one newspaper declared, "The political career of Abraham Lincoln has ended." 8 years later, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. What happened in between? A masterclass in Stoic resilience, not by ignoring criticism, but by using it as kindling for transformation. Picture Lincoln hunched over his desk, reading editorials that called him a third-rate country lawyer and a joke. Instead of crumpling the papers, he filed them under a label only he could appreciate: fuel. Lincoln's comeback blueprint mirrors Stoic principles point for point. First, he practiced objective detachment, separating useful truth from emotional noise. When the Chicago Times mocked his high-pitched voice and awkward gestures, he didn't deny his shortcomings. He hired a theater coach to refine his delivery while keeping the substance of his message intact. That's the Stoic art of discernment. This part is valid, that part is static. Next came selective engagement. After losing a Senate race, he was flooded with letters gloating over his defeat. His response, silence. But when a critic penned a thoughtful critique of his economic policies, Lincoln invited him to Springfield for debate. Epictetus would have nodded approvingly at that boundary. You own your attention, spend it like gold. Then came Lincoln's most stoic move, amor fati, loving his fate. Following his 1858 Senate loss to Stephen Douglas, he told supporters, "I'm like the boy who stubbed his toe. He was too big to cry, but it hurt too much to laugh." That blend of honesty and humor is pure Marcus Aurelius. Instead of resenting the loss, Lincoln mined it for data, realizing his moderate stance on slavery had cost him progressive votes. 2 years later, he recalibrated his platform and won the presidency. Now, your turn. Grab a notebook and draft your own comeback narrative using Lincoln's template. Start with 3 columns: criticism received, stoic filter, actionable takeaway. Under the first, list the harshest feedback you've gotten, whether it's "you're not leadership material" or "your ideas are unrealistic." In the second, channel Epictetus. Is this within my control? Is there a kernel of truth? Finally, the third column is where alchemy happens. Maybe "you're not leadership material" becomes master public speaking or shadow a mentor. Lincoln's genius was turning slurs into syllabi, letting every insult outline his next lesson. The final step, write a letter to your future self, dated 1 year from today. Describe how each criticism, fair or foul, shaped your growth. Be specific. That comment about my poor time management led me to adopt the Pomodoro technique, and now I mentor others on productivity. This isn't fantasy, it's cognitive rehearsal. Seneca did this daily, scripting challenges as if they'd already been overcome. When Lincoln walked into his debates, he carried pages of imagined victories in his mind long before they materialized. History remembers Lincoln's resilience not because he never fell, but because he kept rising with a stoic's poise, transforming jeers into gears that propelled him forward. Your critics, they're just the unpaid coaches of your comeback story. The question isn't whether they'll speak, it's whether you'll listen like a philosopher, mining their words not for wounds but for wisdom. We've explored a whole toolkit of Stoic strategies to reclaim your power, each one a different way to disarm unfair criticism without losing your peace. Detachment teaches us to observe harsh words like weather patterns, noticing them without letting them dictate our inner climate. Reframing turns insults into puzzles, asking not, "Why did they say this?" but "What can I learn from it?" Silence becomes not weakness, but a deliberate choice to conserve energy for what truly matters. And humor, that's the secret weapon disarming malice with lightness, like Zeno laughing off insults as if they were bad jokes at a comedy club. But here's the heart of it all. Stoicism doesn't promise you'll never feel the sting of criticism. It offers something far more empowering, the certainty that no matter how sharp the words, the wound they leave is always yours to dress. Epictetus, the philosopher who endured slavery before teaching emperors, put it perfectly. No one can hurt you without your consent, not because pain isn't real, but because your interpretation is the final gatekeeper. Think of it like this: someone hands you a gift you didn't ask for, a box of resentment, a package of self-doubt. You have 2 choices. You can tear it open, examine every inch, and let it clutter your mental space. Or you can leave it on the doorstep, unopened, until time turns it to dust. That's the Stoic secret, not avoiding delivery, but controlling what gets unpacked. Now, here's your challenge. This week, pick just one principle to practice like a daily vitamin. Maybe it's the 24-hour rule, letting criticism marinate before responding. Or perhaps it's the Philosopher King posture, standing tall not out of arrogance, but because you know your worth isn't up for debate. You could even try the robot reframe, translating heated words into neutral facts like a court reporter transcribing testimony. The goal isn't perfection, it's progress. Each time you choose detachment over defensiveness, humor over hostility, or silence over spiraling, you're doing something radical, rewiring centuries of human instinct to seek approval at all costs. History's most resilient figures weren't invincible, they were intentional. Lincoln channeled ridicule into reinvention. Mandela transformed prison taunts into moral authority. And you, your critics, whether they're office gossips or internet strangers, are handing you the raw materials for your own resilience. The question is, will you let their words be the shackles that bind you, or the fire that forges something unbreakable? The toolbox is in your hands now.